Okay, let's continue reading where we left off. We had not been many hours at sea, and were scarcely out of sight of the land when he ordered the ship's hold to be opened up. To my utter astonishment, up onto the deck came more than 24 men, women, and children, shielding their eyes against the unaccustomed brightness. All looked thin and ragged and destitute. Some stood at the ship's side and wept to see the last of the hills of Scotland disappear from view. But many more fell to their knees, thanking God for deliverance out of the hands of their enemy. It was evident to me that they, like me, like Charlie, like every man in the crew, were followers of Bonnie Prince Charlie, Jacobite sympathisers, and every one of us fleeing for our lives. For all of us on that ship, Captain Mackinnon had been our saviour and our guardian angel. This nobility of purpose was born, as I later heard, out of his own grief. His only son, being like me, barely 16 at the time, had been slain at battle, and his poor wife had died soon after a broken heart. Thereafter, the captain had taken it upon himself to save all those hunted fugitives he could find, and to spirit them secretly away to America and safely. I swear no braver man, nor kinder, was ever born. He proved to be a fine seaman too, able to read the waves and the weather as well, and as wisely as he read men's hearts and minds, able too to avoid the ships of the English fleet that were now a constant threat to our liberty, to our very lives. With such a man as our captain at the helm, little could go amiss, I thought, but in this I was to be sorely mistaken. Charlie was never entirely happy below deck, where there was always a great press of people about us. Accustomed as we were to the wide open spaces of the Highlands, the crowded and stifling conditions of our close confinement made us both restless. So whether I was on watch or not, we lived as much as possible when the weather allowed, up on deck where we could breathe in the wind, where we could see the great expanse of the sky and the ocean, where we could be more alone and at ease. There were many nights, too, when, to avoid the heat and the stench below, we would curl up together on deck and sleep under the stars, a habit my fellow fugitives found altogether incomprehensible and strange. But as time passed, I began to notice that Charlie had taken to pacing anxiously up and down the deck on his own, forever stopping and looking out to sea, longing, as I supposed, for some sight of land. I noticed too that that the approach of a storm he could always be found standing forward at the bow. There he would stay, like a sentry on duty, alert to danger, his ears pricked, his entire body trembling with anticipation and excitement. Then, on a sudden whim, and for no reason I could understand at first, he would lift his head and howl into the wind, a most baleful sound that much unnerved and upset everyone on board. Upon hearing this, murmuring soon went about the ship that Charlie howled like a wolf, and that perhaps he might indeed be a wolf, which presumption, of course, I denied. But my denials went unheeded. Devil dog, some began to call him. Despite all my protests on Charlie's behalf, all my reassurances, mothers began to keep their children away from him, and from me too, children who until now had always played quite contentedly with both of us. I found myself at first shunned, then cast out like a leper and friendless, except it must be said for the good captain, who always remained steadfast in his kindness towards me and towards Charlie. It was often remarked in my hearing, and I confess that I too had noticed it and was puzzled by it, that Charlie seemed to possess an unnatural power, the power to sense the approach of a storm before we did, before even the captain himself. But some on board, those most ferocious in their suspicions of Charlie, went further than this. They put it about that in heralding a storm with his dreadful howling, it must be Charlie himself who brought the storm down upon us, that he was a curse to the ship, and so a threat to all who sailed in her. This rumour ran around the ship like wildfire, and served only to increase their enmity towards us, increasing my sense of rejection and isolation. Worse though was yet to come.